There's a question that lives in the back of every driver's mind at some point during a brokered load. It doesn't always get asked out loud, but it is there. It shows up when the offered rate feels thin and the explanation is some version of, oh, that's just what the market is. It shows up when the load is delivered, the customer is happy with the delivery, everything went right. But that paycheck still leaves you feeling like you were on the wrong side of the math. So today the question is pretty simple. How much did this load actually pay before it got to me? And the fact that many drivers have been asking that question for so long and still don't have a reliable way to get a straight answer tells you almost everything you need to know about where power actually sits in this industry. Good morning, drivers. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Jen, and this is my podcast, Behind the Wheel. I really do appreciate you guys being here with me today. And today, we are getting into broker transparency. And I want to try and approach this one carefully because it's a topic that tends to generate a lot of heat and not always a lot of light. The easy version of this conversation is just brokers are bad and drivers get ripped off. And honestly, while there's enough truth into that to make it satisfying to say, it's not actually the full picture. The more honest version is more complicated. It's more structural, and in some ways, it's way more frustrating because it's not just about bad actors. It's about a system that was built with an information imbalance baked in, and what the imbalance costs the people who can least afford it. So that's where we're going to go with this conversation today. Why broker transparency keeps coming up, why the fight over it is still very much unresolved, and why this issue at its core is really about something a lot bigger than paperwork. Seems like the legal backbone of this whole debate is a federal regulation that's been around for years, which is 49 CFR 371.3. Essentially, the short version is that brokers are required to keep records of each broker transaction, and any party to that transaction has the right to review those records. That sounds pretty straightforward. And on paper, it is. The problem is that a right you have in theory and a right you can actually exercise and practice are two very different things. And in trucking, that gap has been wide enough to drive a truck through, if we're being honest. That gap is exactly what pushed the FMCSA to propose a tightening of the existing rule back in November of 2024. The proposal called for brokers to maintain records electronically, include more complete details on shipment charges and payments, explicitly affirm their obligation to provide these records, and deliver them to carriers within 48 hours of request. None of that came out of nowhere. The OOIDA and the Small Business and Transportation Coalition have been pushing the FMCSA for years to strengthen the rule and address one specific problem that had been quietly undermining the whole framework. Contract language that forces carriers to waive their access rights before the load even moves. Think about that for a second. A regulation that gives you a right to information paired with a contract that makes you sign away that right before you can use it. That's not a technicality. That's the point. The issue stopped being abstract when a particular trucking company began a dispute with TQL, and that became public. According to Landline's reporting, the carrier sought transaction records after hauling a load and came to believe it had only received 56% of what the shipper paid. The dispute also surfaced the waiver language problem directly. FMCSA reportedly told TQL to comply with transparency regulations and remove the waiver clause from its agreement. It was that kind of case that put a very specific very real number on a problem drivers had been describing in general terms for years. But then came the part that has become depressingly familiar to anyone who follows regulatory fights in trucking. In September 2025, a federal court ruled in TQL's favor, meaning that even when a carrier could point to the regulation, it could point to the dispute and point to the apparent discrepancy, turning that into actual accountability was still a different battle with a different outcome. The rule existed, the right existed, and it still wasn't enough. As of right now, FMCSA's latest regulatory agenda indicates a second notice of proposed rulemaking is planned for May 2026, rather than moving directly to a final rule. That tells you two things. First, the agency knows the issue is unresolved. Second, drivers are still waiting for anything that functions as a real enforceable answer. The fight is ongoing, and the frustration is definitely earned. Most drivers don't think about broker transparency in terms of federal regulations. They think about it in terms of a feeling, that specific low-grade uneasy that settles in when a rate is offered and something about it just doesn't sit right with them. It's not dramatic to cause a blow-up, but it's just quiet enough to plant a seed of doubt that doesn't go away. That feeling is where the mistrust lives, and it's worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as paranoia, because it usually has a foundation. I want to be honest here, though, because I think this conversation gets really lazy sometimes. Not every broker is actually operating dishonestly, and not every margin is a theft. Brokers, they do serve an actual function in the freight market. They do connect loads to capacity. They do solve logistics problems. They absorb some of the volatility in the spot market. Good brokers are worth something. The issue isn't that brokers exist or that they make money. The issue is specifically about visibility. It's about whether the people doing the physical work have any reasonable way to evaluate whether the arrangement they agreed to was actually fair. And that's where the conversation gets harder, because if a business relationship is genuinely professional, transparency shouldn't feel threatening. It should feel routine. And the fact that so much energy has gone into protecting the broker's ability to operate without disclosing transaction details, including the waiver language that makes carriers sign away their legal rights, suggests that some players in this space, opacity isn't really a side effect. It's the product. What drivers keep bumping into is this. They are being asked to accept risk without the information needed so that they can properly evaluate that risk. When a load falls apart or when the detention burns the day, the driver absorbs that cost. They are the ones making judgment calls in that real time. And yet, the one piece of information that would help them understand whether the deal made sense in the first place is the piece they're most systematically denied access to. That's not how fair business works. That's how lopsided businesses work. In a soft freight market, this dynamic gets even more corrosive. When rates are already tight and every load feels like a negotiation between breaking even and falling behind, the question of what the shipper actively paid becomes more than academic. It becomes the difference between understanding your position and just hoping the people above you in the chain are being straight with you. Hope is not a business strategy, and drivers who've been in this long enough have generally stopped treating it like one. There's also something worth naming that doesn't really get discussed enough, and that is the toll that chronic uncertainty takes on people. Trucking already asks drivers to absorb a lot of the things that they don't have control over. Typically chaos of 100 different things going on sideways for reasons that have nothing to do with them. And on top of all of that, you're going to add that you'll never really know if the load was priced fairly isn't just a minor convenience. It's just one more thing that makes the job feel like it was designed with someone else's interest in mind. It accumulates, and it's a big part of why the trust between drivers and the brokerage side of this industry has been so difficult to rebuild, even when individual relationships are fine. The practical fix, when it comes, needs three things. The right to access transaction records has to actually function as a right, not something that disappears because of contract language buried in a carrier agreement. Timing matters enormously too, which is why the proposed 48-hour window is significant. Information that arrives weeks after the fact, or after the load has been delivered and the money is moved, isn't transparency. It's more of a formality. And the third piece is culture. Drivers asking about the money behind the load shouldn't be treated as a confrontation. It should be treated as just a normal part of business between two adults who are about to take on a real risk. So with all that being said, basically what broker transparency really comes down to, underneath all the regulatory language and the legal disputes in the proposed rulemakings, is a question about what kind of industry trucking wants to be. Because information is leverage. The person who sees the complete picture of a transaction can negotiate from a position of knowledge. They can evaluate the deal on what it actually merits, protect their margin, and make informed decisions about what to accept and what to walk away from. The person who sees the least is the person most dependent on trusting that whoever does the full picture is using it fairly. In trucking, that person has consistently been the driver, and that's not an accident. It's the result of a system built incrementally over time in a way that concentrated information at the brokerage level and normalized its absence at the carrier level. What I keep typically coming back to when it comes to this topic is the distinction between a hard deal and a blind deal. A hard deal can still be fair. Rates can be tough. Margins can be thin. The market can be whatever this is right now. And a driver can evaluate a hard deal and decide whether it makes sense. That's agency. That's the ability to make an informed business decision. A blind deal is something different. A blind deal asks the driver to accept the terms without the information necessary to understand. It asks for trust that hasn't been earned by any particular demonstration of trustworthiness. And it also asks for that trust from the person already carrying the most risk in the transaction. The regulatory process is moving, even if slowly. A second proposed rulemaking in May 2026 does mean the conversation's continuing at the federal level. But drivers who've watched regulatory fights in trucking know there's a significant difference between a proposed rule and an enforceable one. And an even larger distance between an enforceable rule and a culture that actually honors what the rule intends. Those distances takes years to close, and they close faster when the industry decides to lead rather than wait to be dragged. If trucking genuinely wants to rebuild trust between carriers and the broker side of this business, the path there is not complicated. It's just uncomfortable for the people who benefit most from the current arrangement. Be transparent about the transaction. Honor the right to records without making it a fight. Stop treating visibility as a threat and start treating it as a baseline expectation for doing business with people who are taking on real risk on your behalf. If the deal is fair, the number shouldn't be frightening. If the relationship is professional, the record shouldn't need to be hidden. And if the business is built to last, it should be able to survive a little sunlight. The fact that so much of this industry has resisted that sunlight for so long is the most telling data point of all. All right, drivers, that's all I've got for you today. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you guys watching these videos. If you like this video or any of the videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and also leave a comment down below. I'd love to get some feedback and just hear what you guys have to say about this particular topic. So with that being said, drivers, thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next video.